Next question I kind of wanted to get to kind of hits me close to home, just because, let me give you some background here. When I'm not producing podcasts and when I'm not, I used to work in politics, but I pretty much now make my living in the entertainment industry as a technical editor on reality television shows. So my job is to, I take footage and I organize that footage in a way that another set of editors can then access all the HD video and all the various tracks of audio at the exact same time to actually make creative decisions and produce a television show. Now, I've had this job for the last, on and off for the last 10, 12 years, okay? And I'm damn good at my job. But one thing that has been changing is the technology, okay? We use the same editing program, but over the last 10 years, companies have written other programs that have essentially taken the jobs that 10, 12 years ago were done by 7 or 8 people and that are now done by myself and a bunch of machines and technicians running the machines. So I know your work in the Obama administration was, the Office of Tech and Innovation, and automation is it's a wonderful thing because it makes my job easier, but at the same time it scares me because I see a lot of the tasks that I do on a day-to-day basis that I don't see why over the course of the next 15, 20 years that won't be just done by a robot. So can you give us your perspective on the future of automation, artificial intelligence, and really just what America's workforce is going to look like over the next 25 years?
Absolutely. And I think it's not only an important conversation domestically within the U.S., but certainly a challenge that the entire world is confronting. I think there are about 4 key areas that we would want to unpack here. The first is what the concept of work is to us. Many of us actually see our jobs, and this is a common refrain that our President Obama would articulate, which is if you work hard, you do the right thing, you invest in time in your family, and try and drum up the resources that you can, then you should live a little better off, and that you should be able to move incrementally in the direction of progress, and hopefully make sure that your children are better off than you as well in that road. Work, though, beyond just being able to extract a salary and put food on the table and spend good time with your family, also has this interesting way of penetrating our sense of self, our worth, our value in this world. And so I think it's really, really important for both individuals that think about their current work and what it might mean for them to be offset by technology in the future, as well as business executives and those that are maybe overseeing the research and development dollars going into the around the corner technology that could offset these jobs. Both of those individuals, the worker and the R&D decision maker, need to be mindful that as we continue to grow and progress, our sense of worth and our sense of self has always been tied to experimenting and trying new approaches and trying to see how we can do things better. And so I know this might sound a little kitschy or too overly philosophical when we're talking about dollars in our pocket and food on the table, but I do think that we need to create an environment that at least allows for innovation and allows for experimentation. In particular, we heard after the last election outcome a rising chorus of this conversation, particularly rooted in what was going on with coal country in West Virginia. Famously, now President Trump, then candidate Trump, talked about how a lot of the technology celebrated in either coasts of America was undercutting the ability for them to do their job. But when you take a look at the total number of coal jobs that we've seen, not just in West Virginia, but across the country, and the total number of new jobs netted out by software development, AI development, new manufacturing approaches, all of which has yet to be fully realized, the job consideration, the total number of jobs, is actually infinitely higher on the new technology side of the column. So this isn't necessarily just a matter of job loss, but it is a matter of job evolution. And I think we need to start at that first premise, so that way we're approaching this, again, clear-eyed and rational about where we can invest accordingly and responsibly, and where we can innovate responsibly, and not just assume that there's an impending Terminator-like scenario. So if that's the first bucket, the second bucket is actually brass tacks. How do we account for this? I do think that we hear a lot about new training and new types of work and how people account for those jobs. And so we've seen, whether it's the steam engine, whether it's high performance computers that replaced, mathematicians and human-like calculators for NASA-based jobs, or whether we've seen sewing machines offset particular prior textile-based jobs. We've seen this evolution time and time again. Yes, we are at this point where technology is moving leaps and bounds ahead former levels of progress, but at the same time, it is creating new paths and new approaches of the types of work. So maybe if you see a robot strolling down the street making a delivery for you, you're kind of worried about, is that impacting the courier's job? But you know what? While we should have a very, very honest conversation about that, we should also take a look at maybe what other ancillary jobs or peripheral jobs the supply chain to create that robotic is creating, or how to actually manage that fleet of robotics is creating, or what other types of skills may be necessary to invest in that person who was initially the courier but now needs a new role. And so calculating the sort of follow-on job creation is going to be important to this conversation. And how do you actually create, and policymakers need to focus on how you create the right environment and right business contours to make sure more of that grows. The third part, though, is certainly on the skills-based side. And this is something that you constantly hear policymakers talk about as sort of the issue du jour when it comes to automation. And that's upskilling, investment in STEM, diversifying the pipeline of talent. And I think it's time for both policymakers and businesses alike to stop referencing STEM as sort of a catch-all term that's going to solve all of our problems when it comes to the job loss that you, Tony, could very much have already experienced and could very much feel in a more acute sense, and start putting money where their mouth is. So that means taking a look at how cities currently offer skills development for those that might be in the workforce but need a leg up to move to the next rung in their career development, or who are outside of the workforce. A lot of cities, including the city of San Francisco, of Tulsa, of New York City, Albany, Seattle, they have these job training programs, but some of them don't necessarily have all the tools and resources that they need at the city government level to understand what are the coding abilities necessary to make sure that the auto mechanic today not only knows how to poke under the hood, but also knows how to poke under the operating system of a car outfitted with new technology. Or what are the data science abilities that are necessary for a Department of Public Works that monitors potholes and throughways and how snow is piling up through the streets? Should they be using seasonal data recorders to understand volumes of snow so that way they can make more informed decisions when allocating city-based resources? Government has a unique ability to understand a snapshot of concerns going on when it comes to workforce development in their own communities. But business has a unique opportunity to infuse and inject some of their own talent and know-how into these programs to make sure that that skills development really starts moving along. So I know this sounds quite long-winded, but the main point here is that government and the private sector needs to start experimenting today to make sure that that STEM investment is not just a theoretical notion in which teachers at public school districts start updating their curricula, but rather that there's a continuous learning path in which new skill sets and new approaches to doing work in the 21st century are actually offered at any stage in life, particularly late stage jobs where folks like you, Tony, or folks in the trucking industry, or those folks back in West Virginia are actually going to feel the impact and actually derive some concrete benefits. The fourth and final bucket that I'll flag, and then I'll stop rambling, is that when it does come to the future of what artificial intelligence or machine learning actually implies, there is one core area that I think many of listeners of this podcast would be interested in, and that's actually not often talked about in the way of job loss, but really talked about in terms of biases. If you take a look at machine learning, if a local police department were going to use an intelligent algorithm to try and suss out based off of, crime statistics, booking statistics of police arrests, or even driving violations, all of this in the aggregate, you can chop that data up in really interesting ways to determine, hey, X neighborhood has this pretty high volume of criminal activity, at least as analyzed and read in by the data set we're looking at. Therefore, we should make a decision as a department, not having somebody hover over documents, but maybe a smarter machine to determine where we're putting police resources in that given day. That would be a pretty smart use of taxpayer dollars to have more efficient resource allocation for criminal law enforcement. But if we're talking about pivoting from a data set that was informed by humans, making judgment calls on whether someone should be arrested because perhaps they were a person of color, and even though they just had a broken taillight, they were a little bit difficult with the officer that was talking to them, and therefore we booked that arrest. If some of the data has already inherent biases that we have as a society has created, then that AI tool that's really focused on just pulling the data and doing pretty rational and purely objective calculations about where to determine that this neighborhood has had a lot of arrests of people of color, then the allocation of resources is going to only perpetuate that allocation to neighborhoods with people of color. And so I think that's another way of saying that we need to not only be mindful of what these advances can mean for new jobs, we need to not only be mindful of what these advances have to demand of new skills, but we also have to be very careful in the way that we defer to these new technologies, because they could perpetuate some very real biases if we do not integrate them responsibly in our society. And I think that only undergirds the very first point about needing to continue to test and needing to continue to experiment. Because if we fear the ability to even innovate and see what this looks like in very small scale experimentation modes, then we'll never really realize their benefit, and we'll only sort of cower in fear away from what's possible as a greater society in the name of progress.